think you're on mute, Ashman. You're unmuted, buddy.
Welcome, one and all, to the Rising Stars of Ophthalmology and the second season, second episode. Today, let's take a plunge into refractive cataract surgery. And we have a plethora of experts here to talk to us about it. But before we go ahead, let me introduce the concept. And it's a 9 virtual episode series, which basically in each episode will feature one rising star surrounding them with 3 celebrity panelists. And when I say celebrity, I don't mean Brangelina. Sorry for the disappointment, guys. I just mean the real heroes that we learn a lot from in the field of ophthalmology. This is an interactive discussion. So any audience member watching out there can throw a question out in the chat window on our website, as well as our YouTube channel. We are live on risingeyestars.com and on our YouTube channel called Rising Stars in Ophthalmology. The reruns can be watched on the website because we know that this is a global event and the times might not match. Also, watch out for our social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, because we put out some extremely educative tips and snippets from all our episodes collected from season 1 and 2. I'd like to thank you guys personally for tuning in and thank the sponsors for making this happen. Also, to do the honors of introducing our celebrity panel and our speaker, I would like to introduce Jennifer Lowe. So Jennifer, all yours.
Hi. Thank you so much, Ashman. As always, it's an honor to be your co-host and an honor to be with everyone tonight. So welcome to episode 2 of season 2. I'd first like to thank our sponsors, and I'd like to share our sponsors screen. So our season 2 sponsors include Allergan, Elcon, Bisis, Avellino, Dompe, Sun Ophthalmics, and Tarsus. So without their support, it would be very difficult for us to sponsor our episodes. So again, we thank them for all their help and support through the years. Okay, so now I'd like to share my screen and showcase our amazing celebrity panelists, as well as our rising star for this episode. So first, again, welcome to episode 2, featuring our rising star, Blake Williamson, and our celebrity panelists. So 1 second. Okay, so first up, as our first celebrity here, we have Quentin Allen, who's currently practicing in Stuart, Florida. He did his medical school training at Duke University and residency at the Cleveland Clinic, and he has a focus on cataract, MIGS, and refractive surgery. Carlos Buznego, who's also practicing in South Florida at the Center for Excellence in Eye Care in Miami. He's a volunteer faculty at the Florida International University. He did medical school at Washington University in St. Louis and residency at Bascom Palmer, and also has a focus on cataract, MIGS, and refractive surgery. And last but not least, we have Tal Raviv, who's in New York City. He's a clinical associate professor of ophthalmology at the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary. And he also started his own practice called the Eye Center of New York. He did medical school at Brown University, residency at New York Eye and Ear, and a refractive and cornea fellowship at Rush Hospital. And he also has a focus on cataract, refractive, and MIGS. So to introduce our rising star, who many of you already know, and he's probably already a star that has risen, but we're honored to have him to speak tonight, is the one and only Blake Williamson, who practices at Williamson Eye Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And he did medical school at LSU, ophthalmology residency at Tulane, and he did a fellowship with Chuck Williamson in refractive cataract surgery and anterior segment surgery. I'd like to share a few pictures. Blake, would you like to jump in and say a few words about these photos?
Yeah, this is some good stuff. The best one at the bottom left. That's my wife and I on the beach in Tulum. We do our best to sneak away from our 3 kids as often as possible and have mom and dad time. And Tulum's a great place for that. Wild place, really. Top right, that was The Voice. They started this thing called The Voice of Ophthalmology. I think Tao just recently won that. But the first year I did it, and I was fortunate to win with my little talk and my coach Liz Yu. That was cool. In the top left there, that's me and the big dog, my old man. When we just got our new Catalyst femto, so we're sitting in the femto suite, posing next to it as if it was a trophy buck.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that's really cool. And I like the voice one. That's an amazing photo. I mean, you look
Yeah,
like a
that
real.
was fun stuff. That was a cool experience.
Yeah, that's really amazing. All right, good. And you're also a famous DJ and wake surfer. I'm sure all of us on tonight can appreciate and love your wake surfing videos, especially with your son. Those are amazing.
Yeah, that's an ACOS on the right, and I'm not a DJ like Q. Q is a really famous DJ. Every Wednesday night I go to 96.9 FM, which is our local community station here in town, and my show is classic blues and classic country pre 1975. So Wednesday's my big surgery day, but that evening I end up at my radio show and kind of let loose and play records with my co-host and just listening to oldies. So that's kind of my gig. I enjoy that stuff.
That's really cool. And last but not least, of course, is your beautiful family and your beautiful wife, as I know her as Mama, which is what you affectionately call her. And I love that. Yeah. Super cute.
We got together when we were 18 years old. She's my very first date in college. And out of all my buddies, they had many girlfriends come and go, but she stayed. So we started calling her Mama because she kind of took care of me and all my buddies. And so till this day, I don't call her Nicole, I call her Mama. And those are our three boys. We had 3 boys in 4 years. So we kind of had our hands full now. That's Waylon up top. And that's Rains. He's our middle boy in the middle there. He's our hippie child with long hair. And then at the bottom, that's the Stinky Twinkie. We call him Mr. Forrester. And that's our family. That's the unit.
Oh. It's beautiful. Yeah, I thought her name was Mama for a long time. No, I'm just joking.
No.
Kidding. All right. Thank you so much. And now I'll stop sharing as we practice, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jen, for the introduction. Those are some fun photos. And appreciate all the sponsors for allowing us to get together, and certainly all of everybody watching and listening to this. I'm going to share my screen here. So can you guys see that okay? Perfect. Yeah. So, I was kind of trying to figure out what to present. I watched what a great job y'all did in season 1. And, a lot of the refractive cataract talks were focused on femtosecond lasers or advanced lenses, which is what I love. And so I said, what can I do that's different? And I wasn't going to talk about IOL formulas and, nerdy stuff like that. I said, let me talk about stuff that I actually really enjoy. And I have to tell you, I really enjoy talking about the art and psychology of the patient conversation and the perfect refractive cataract consult, right? Oftentimes it's not about a conversion. It's just about a conversation. And we have, 3 great panelists, all of whom I look up to, all of whom I consider friends, who I've learned a lot from. And one thing that we all have in common is we have conversations like this every day with our refractive cataract patients. So I thought this would be a cool topic, and we want to be interactive. I'm going to present, but I have some questions built in for each of the panelists that we'll get to kind of throughout, and also they can be some text questions in for people who are listening if you want to put it in the chat as well. So let's see here. So none of my disclosures are really relevant. I do want to especially thank Bennett Walton, Dr. Walton in Houston, Texas. He helped with some of the content, some of the slides here. He's got a unique approach to some of this too. So shout out to Bennett if he's watching. And here's our agenda. We're going to talk about how from, sort of the setting the stage for the appropriate cataract consult starts with pre-op. Intra-op ends up being the easy part. Post-op is easy as long as you don't, mess things up and let small things become big things. And then lastly, we'll kind of dip into unhappy patients, and that can sometimes be psychological warfare. Pre-op is really where all the heavy lifting takes place. And I love this slide because, you look at that and it looks like a 5-star, meal at a fancy, Michelin restaurant. Well, the recipe for a happy post-op cataract patient really starts from the very beginning, way before you start operating, right? The chief ingredients to that, in my opinion, are patient selection, education, and expectation management, right? You have to have that before you ever even start. Similarly, you may look at this and think, oh, wow, that looks delicious. This is like some fancy restaurant. But really, on the left, that picture on the left, that's actually Cheese Whiz on celery with some raisins smacked on there. And on the right, that's a fillet of fish from Mickey D's with some sauce and some hippie flowers there. So you can dress that up all you want, and but you can do perfect surgery. But if you don't have the foundations and the ingredients, you're not going to have a good outcome. Just like in this example here. So, how do you start to get around that? Well, the thing is, education starts before they ever get to you, and that's super important. Okay, you have to have their mindset kind of geared where you need it to be from the very beginning. You can't do it soon enough. Referring ODs that send to me, I don't have a whole bunch. We tend to employ our ODs as opposed to doing a whole lot of co-management. But the ones that do, they have packets at their office. And they're giving them that anytime they send them to me for a cataract surgery, which is great. They come super educated. Operating on your ODs is huge. One of the best tips and advice I can give you for growing your refractive practice is operate on your referral sources, because at that point they've been there, done that, right? They can never take that back, that you were their surgeon, and they obviously hopefully have a great outcome, of course, and then they can share that with patients, and that's going to build beautifully. Making sure that your internal and external marketing is aligned with your messaging. For instance, there are technologies which can help you reduce or eliminate your need for glasses post-op. Everything that I do, whether it's billboard or it's a television commercial or it's a radio or it's print or it's social media, we have our hands in all different types of marketing, but they all kind of have that same thing. It's not about technology, but it's really about the lifestyle benefit of freedom from glasses and contacts, and we're consistent with that. On the right there, you see, this is one of my satellites, one of the front desk. You see that little Catalyst poster. I'm a big believer in femto, and we have that sort of big 6 foot tall banner right when you walk in. So when the moment they walk in, and while they're sitting in my waiting room, they're looking at that, right? So when they come into my cataract consult, they say, "Hey, tell me about that laser." Similarly, on either side of my cell and eye chart, I have posters of the different lens designs that are out there, just so it promotes conversation. So that's huge. And then lastly, making sure that you avoid overpromising with all your marketing. Never want to have anything out there in your marketing talking about throwaway glasses or anything like that. That's how you can end up getting into the problem. Carlos, I think you got to mute there. I can hear you. No worries. So on consult day, so the patient gets to you on the consult day. You only get one chance to make a good first impression, right? So the first thing I do is I get a weather report from my scribe. I call it a weather report. It's a patient list for the day, for my clinic day. And I used to not do that until one day I had the district attorney come in. I was behind, and he ended up waiting like an hour or more to see me. I didn't even know he was there because I didn't check my list before. And the very next patient after him was my mother-in-law, and she's too sweet to let anybody know, "Hey, my son-in-law's the doctor. Why is it taking so long?" And ever since that day, I was so embarrassed that I was just too busy. I didn't get a chance to glance and see who was coming in, but I never made that mistake again. So making sure that you know who's on your schedule and who's coming in is important, right? Sitting in your waiting room is important, because here's my waiting room at my flagship refractive center. You want it to look nice. I'd like for it to look kind of like a hotel lobby as opposed to a doctor's office. And that's important because some people are coming in spending $10,000, $12,000 on these vision correction procedures, and I want them to feel like they're in a high-end practice from the get-go. Understanding wait times is key. Also observing how your front desk interacts with your guests. Are they just screaming their name from the front desk across the waiting room, or do they know what they look like because they've taken a picture and it's in our EMR, and they approach them quietly and say, "Mrs. Smith, the doctor will see you now." That's what we do. Listening to the workups of your technicians is important, right? I'll sometimes stand outside the door if I don't have a patient, and especially if it's a newer technician, and listen to the words she's using and the phrases she's using to describe the different options, right? That's key. And then lastly, there's no such thing as a small thing. You guys see that this is in yellow here. So there'll be several quotes throughout this talk that I actually highlight in yellow. And I give these quotes, there's like 5 or 6 of them that I give to every new technician starting with me. And it really defines kind of how we think about and talk to patients. And there's no such thing as a small thing. It's something I learned from my dad. And it comes from, it applies to everything, whether it be the way your waiting room looks, or the words you use in a consult, or how your staff is dressed, or the different options that you offer, and whether the slit lamp is clean, and anything, biometry, for God's sakes, and all the time you put in an effort to choosing your lens. There's no such thing as a small thing. That's a big thing. So Tal, I wanted to bring you in here because I know that you started your own practice, and I think you've upgraded actually to a bigger space recently. And I know that you've done some makeovers with how the practice looks. Maybe share a pearl or two about making a good, positive first impression.
Like everything you said, warms my heart. It's such an important part of our business. There's more and more talk about, the patient experience, the guest experience. And I like what you've said about the amount of money being spent and how we're really in the hospitality business. There's no way around it. It's not just a service industry, it's hospitality. And patients are paying what they would pay to go on a first class international flight or more. And if you look at, what the Centurion Lounge looks like, why shouldn't our office be any different in the way people interact with everyone? And you're doing that, and it makes a huge difference. I started a practice where I bought, an older practice of a retiring doctor of general. I upgraded that practice to nice, and then we just recently took it to the next level and really built a beautiful space in the prime location in town with a view. And I thought, people ask me, how are you going to make that investment back? Are you raising your prices? Are you doing this? I said, this is going to just change that experience. So much of our business is about word of mouth. It's about having the patient this is in New York City, and this is, the refractive cataract surgeon. What I do, what all of us do, is just have them have an experience that they just haven't had before in healthcare. And that works as the best ambassador to our practice. So that's what I've done. And that's what you're doing, Blake. And no such thing as a small thing. We can repeat that 1,000 times. We can all learn from that. We're always trying to improve every little part of it. I want to have someone just as responsible for taking something like a host, like a restaurant has, taking someone in, taking their coat off, putting something down, getting them a drink. We don't do that yet, but that's sort of what I'd like to evolve to. If I can have enough people showing up at work, and once our work shortage is over and everything else. But these are the thoughts I'm having: is how can we keep enhancing the patient experience? And you're doing it, Blake.
I love it. I've learned so much from you on that part. I remember you giving a talk about the experience economy and stuff like that in the past. And so yes, I appreciate your insight there. Okay, so you've done your consult. Or the consult day is about to start, rather, and they're there. They haven't seen you yet. What I do is I make sure I get really good, reliable diagnostics. That's a huge part of this. GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. We have to avoid it. So, you got to have updated diagnostics and trained technicians running them. That's huge, right? So, you cannot accept a topography that's got $2 a sill and it's totally irregular when it should be a beautiful bow tie, unless it truly is a regular cylinder. In that case, okay, but typically it's just not. So that's a huge part. Here's our testing wall at my center. My workup in general, I'll do a tear lab, MMP9, OPD3, and Pentacam, making sure those kind of match. I'll always do an OCT MAC no matter what. I'll always do a Claris wide field image no matter what as well. And I make sure all that looks good. I also do have my biography on my HD analyzer, as well as my Pentacam, in case I needed to have a patient that's got MGD or something like that. I think reviewing your imaging is huge. Before you actually walk into the room, I like to have a couple ideas of what I'm thinking for this patient, right? It just kind of keeps me focused. I love to look at the topography too before I actually enter the room, because sometimes you can pick up little subtle things like some EBMD or something like that you may not normally stain for and look for otherwise. So that's another tip. Okay, now the stage has been set. All right, you got good diagnostics, your front desk did a good job. Now you enter the patient room. And this is where the magic happens. Those who communicate the best will beat the rest. My grandfather was actually a big fan of William White, who was an urbanist and a best-selling author and advertiser in the 50s. And they used to hire him to go into bigger organizations and teach them how to communicate. And one quote, and I've got this that highlighted, one quote my grandfather taught me is, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion it occurred. Right? And how true is that you'll be talking to your staff and you'll say, hey, make sure to call that patient about XYZ or whatever. And it never happens. And when you circle back and you're like, wait, oh, wait, I thought you meant this. And you thought you communicated, but you really didn't, right? The same thing is true with our patients. His quote says, this is in Fortune magazine in 1950, we have talked enough, but we have not listened. And by not listening, we have failed to conceive the immense complexity of our society, and thus the great gaps between ourselves and those with whom we seek understanding. Now he's talking about, in the urban environment, setting up, spaces and things like that, and not listening to the society. But I was like, man, that kind of translates to the exam room, right? I mean, how often do you guys interrupt your patients? I feel like I do it all the time. I don't mean to, but you're busy. Oftentimes, we've done so many of these cases and had so many consults that you can finish your patient's sentence, right? But you gotta wait for them to finish what they're saying. So that's a huge part is over communication. So the biggest thing, my biggest tip is to over communicate everything during your consult. Understand why the patient is actually there. How many of you have had that patient that comes in and says, hey, I'm here to get cataract surgery because my eyes are gritty, right? Or I'm here to, that has nothing to do with it. That's something else, redness, allergy, something else. I'm coming to get cataract surgery because my vision's blurry when I read, right? Again, has nothing to do with it. That could be dry eye, right? So it's very important that you understand why the patient is actually there. Listening to their visual goals and not interrupting them, again, is super important. Making sure you know what they do as hobbies, making sure you understand what they can live without and what they can't is going to be key, especially with all these different lenses and options. Performing an exhaustive search for everything else that's wrong with them, which has nothing to do with cataract, is a big part of what I do. So I'm literally searching for anything: dry eye, allergy, amblyopia, diplopia, strabismus, corneal issues, retinal issues. And what I do is I position these issues as chronic problems, which cataract surgery doesn't necessarily address and may have some effect on their visual potential. And as a result of that, postoperatively, if I do have that 20/25 -1 patient, all of a sudden I can bring up, well, remember you did have that subtle refractive amblyopia we talked about, right? And stuff like that is huge to communicate on the front end. You got to do that. And then lastly, when something is structurally wrong, don't just show them or don't just tell them about it, show them. So play show and tell when there's something structurally wrong. Look at this topography, some irregular astigmatism. It's picked up on the Myers there on the topo. Or what about a little parafoveal cyst? You and I look at that parafoveal cyst, chances are they're still refracting to very good vision. The retina specialist is not going to do a thing, but you know what? I'm still rescinding that to my retina specialist because I want to communicate to them on the front end that they have something else wrong with them, and I show them that picture, right? So on the back end, if I have a problem, I get to go right back to it. Pictures matter, okay? Other pearls for your consult. I want you guys to beware of the low myope, okay? Over communicate that they're gonna lose their near if they choose a monofocal. That's key. That's a way to kind of shoot yourself in the foot. That patient's -2. If you lose that near, they may be pretty PO'd that happens. So that's key and may drive them to a presbyopia solution. Having a good relationship with a retina specialist who is happy to see non-urgent patients for routine cataract clearance is also big, as I've kind of alluded to. I send anything and everything. If there's a problem, floaters or any type of ERM or anything, even though I know they're not going to operate and they're probably going to clear the patient for surgery, I still send, because that patient might not remember the word parafoveal cyst, but they will remember traveling to a retina specialist office, sitting in their waiting room and seeing them. So it's not what you tell your patients, it's what they remember. I have that highlighted. It's another quote that my team, I talk about all the time. Do things to make patients remember. Don't just tell patients things. The goal of all of this is to dramatically undersell so you can dramatically overdeliver. We've heard about undersell, overdeliver, but few people talk about dramatically underselling and therefore dramatically overdelivering. It's going to decrease the amount of touch-ups you do, the amount of lens exchanges and all that stuff. And all this leads up to the fact that expectations are premeditated resentments. which I think is a hilarious statement taken from the Alcohol Anonymous 12-step handbook. But it's so true, right? People who, resent something, a choice that they made, it's often because they didn't have the right expectations going in. So I love that quote. Carlos, talk to us about a pearl about how you communicate with patients.
I communicate in Spanish. That's my big pearl. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think you've done a great job. I think it's a great idea to talk about this. I think the psychology and the patient management of these patients is so critical, and trying to figure out. So to me, one of the big issues is figuring out who is a perfectionist, because the perfectionist patients are the ones who will drive you crazy. And so what I like to do, first of all, I was worried about insulting them. And I realized that people who are perfectionists are very proud of the fact that they're perfectionists. So when first question I ask people often is, what do you do for a living, right? Are you retired? You still working? What do you do for a living? So engineers tend to be folks, and I share with them, in a loving way. I said, engineer's job is to find what's wrong with anything. So as opposed to, oh my God, what a beautiful house this is, an engineer is going to say, that door frame is kind of crooked and the floor is a little tilted, and there, the finish on the floor is different here than there. And I think, and they immediately go, oh my God, yeah, you're right. I go to the hospital. I had a patient recently goes, I used to work for hospitals and I did the zoning, and I can tell you, like, the sprinklers are in the wrong place. And I'm like, as he's saying this, I'm like, thank you, Jesus, for not letting me put a multifocal in this patient. And you just tell them very straightforward, these patients, if you're a perfectionist, these implants are not the best for you. You want to have pristine distance, and we're going to give you some near glasses, and that's going to be the greatest thing for you. So I think, again, finding out who's a perfectionist, utilizing the spouse. You haven't really talked about that. So in the Latin community, patients come in with their spouses. So I know it's interesting, do you leave the spouse outside the room? Do you bring them in the room? Our community and our culture, you bring the patient, everyone's in the same room. And oftentimes, I'll say something, and I'll speak to the spouse and say, is he a perfectionist? I'm like, oh my God, is he a perfectionist? So again, remember, these folks have been married 50 years and they have they've learned all the adaptation. But the flip side is, if you throw out some bait, they will go for it. And explaining that, oh my God, yes, he rubs his eyes all the time, or, whatever, patients like that. So, really trying to tease out what kind of, what kind of perfectionism thing. So again, flip side, Monovision. I'm a big user of Monovision. If somebody's ever used Monovision, one of my key questions is, did you ever use contacts? Did you ever use Monovision? And utilizing that, again, usually people who are Monovision are sort of used to, okay, I can adapt slightly different vision, one eye versus the other eye. The folks will tell you, oh my God, I never used Monovision. It drove me crazy. That's sort of a little bit of a different mindset. So, I think there's a whole lot of psychology in this. I really applaud you. This is a really interesting talk. And one of the other issues that, you haven't talked about yet, we're going to talk about presumably is neuroadaptation. So, how willing is somebody to adapt to what they got? Now, we see patients every day who will say, my vision is fine. They're 20/60. They got 4+ NS cataract. People adapt to stuff, and people adapt just as they adapted pre-op, they adapt post-op. And I think just utilizing, that ability for patients to adapt is something, we'll talk about it as we talk about post-op. But, trying to get a little bit of a gestalt for what patients' expectations are. And I don't necessarily spend a lot of warm, fuzzy time asking if they like knitting versus tying flies, but I think a little bit of just, how do you use glasses, and do you want to be out of glasses to me is one of the big issues, and just what's their adaptability to some imperfections in their vision in order to be glasses free.
Beautiful. I hope that our listeners, caught that one of those pearls, because, for me, it's always challenging. How do you bring up something that could be considered an insult, like asking someone if they're a perfectionist? But what you do is you use a little bit of comedy, a little bit of tongue in cheek, hey, an engineer's job is to look for what's wrong, right? Or bringing in the spouse. And I find that comedy is such a great way to broach the subject of something that, could be considered a little bit of a awkward moment. So that's perfect. I'm actually going to start using that with my engineers. Thank you. So when it comes down to discuss the refractive packages, avoid choice paralysis and make a strong recommendation. That's key, right? So here's a study from the Harvard Business Review that I love. They took this company, got like 24 different flavors of their jam, and they set up at like a Whole Foods or something like that. They recorded how many people came up to taste the jam versus how many bought, right? And then literally the very next day, they go in with only 3 jams. And it was something like 1/10 the amount of people bought it when there was 24 choices. So literally you had a 10x, there was 10x the amount of people that bought the jam when there's only 3 choices. So that kind of stuck with the whole idea that if, you have too many choices, people retreat to what they know, which is glasses and contacts. And if you're a refractive cataract surgeon, kind of you're in the business of not doing that, right? So that's key. So this is kind of how I do it. This is one of my patients in my exam lane. The last thing that happens when my teammate leaves the room is she says, hey, Dr. Williamson wants you to watch this video and read this menu, and he'll be right in. So they play an 8-minute video that talks about, it has all of our surgeons on there. We each have a speaking part. It's a personalized video. It's not some computer animation. And we're talking about femtosecond laser. We're talking about our different lens choices. I'm giving them, the different options that we do. So that way, when I walk in the room, the consult's kind of done for me, right? And this is the poster that they get, and it follows this basic, better, best. We don't call it standard because people like things that are standard, right? Or classic. We don't use that word. We just say basic, and that's just manual phaco. And we tell them, hey, that's a wonderful choice. If you don't mind continuing wearing glasses, that's great. Most of my patients, prefer to be out of glasses at some distance. So we talk about laser or toric lenses with option 2 and nailing their distance. And they'll just be in a pair of readers. And then lastly, we do laser with full range of vision in option 3. So when I hit the door, oftentimes they tell me, do they want a number 1, 2, or 3? And one of the biggest things I can tell to all my young docs who are on this call, who may not have, a refractive counselor or may not have a big, busy practice yet, it's okay to talk turkey. And I mean money. And for the longest time, that's been the thing that many doctors say, oh, I'm never going to do that. And I know it's still controversial. And there's no right way or wrong way to do it. I'll just tell you, and it works both ways perfectly. But in my situation, what I found is that most patients already assume that cataract surgery is safe and successful, right? They just want to know how much it costs. That's the elephant in the room, right? And while I do use a refractive counselor for every single case, and I think that's fantastic, I always think it's a good idea just to let the patients have some idea of knowing what the cost of this is. What this does is it avoids sticker shock, right? Because oftentimes I'd have a patient who, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love a full range of vision. I'd love a presbyopia lens and femto. And then they get to my counselor and they say, that's going to be $7,000. And not to mention you have it met your deductible. So that's another $3,000. And all of a sudden it's a $10,000 procedure. And it's just like, whoa, it's like sticker shock, right? And then all of a sudden what happens, my counselor, she feels like a failure. She feels like she wasn't able to quote unquote convert that patient. We hate that word. We don't use that word, but you kind of get the point. So I want to set her up for success, and I don't want my patients to have sticker shock. So I just let them know, I say, listen, here's the total price for what this cost after your insurance is. And then the monthly price, many of my patients prefer to pay this monthly. The monthly price for that is X. And hey, you know what? That's actually about the same as people are paying for their cell phone and Wi-Fi bill these days, right? So that's very important. Compare the monthly price for something to something mundane in their life that they're already paying for. They start to appreciate the value of what we're doing, right? So that's how I do it. I don't get into the nitty gritty. If they ask any more questions about that, I'll probably spend 60 seconds talking turkey. But if they ask anything more, I say, you know what? You're going to be meeting with my counselor in just a minute. She's going to go over it with you exactly. I just want you to have a baseline idea of what things cost, right? A general idea. And they appreciate that, right? It saves a lot of time for my counselor spending 10, 15 minutes on someone that can't afford what we're doing anyway. And oftentimes if they don't do it and they don't convert to whatever we're talking about, they get upset and they end up down the street at another practice. And that doctor says, oh, no problem. You don't need any of that stuff. We can just do it the old fashioned way, And so it's just a challenge. So I think it's very important. Quentin, I was wondering if you could kind of, I don't know what you do in terms of talking about the financial part, if you do some of it or the counselor does all of it or whatever, but maybe just talk about how you educate patients on price when you're talking about refractive procedures.
So I am very much in agreement with you, Blake, and I'll tell you that this has been fantastic so far, and I'm glad that you chose to cover this topic. It's something I think we don't dig into enough oftentimes in these forums. So I'm going to say that I've loved everything Tal and Carlos and you have shared, and so I'll just kind of run through a couple of my ruminations before I hit the price part. But when you walk in, you want to make that first impression. Make eye contact. Let's not forget the little things. Make eye contact. Introduce yourself to the patient and their spouse. But hopefully before you walk in, like you said, you've gotten a weather report from looking at your schedule for the day. I think it's also important to have your scribe or tech give you a heads up about certain things. You know, did the patient have drusen on their macular OCT? Did they have a regular astigmatism, or they have a ton of regular astigmatism and they're a great toric candidate? And so one of the ways you can funnel down so that you can cover some of these important topics like price if you need to, I think, is to have your scribe go in ahead of you and just ask a few basic questions. Have the video shown. We use the checked up wall boards, which I love, and no financial interest, but we love the checked up wall boards. Patients watch a customized video that we have on there that hits several topics. And then my scribe goes in and talks a little bit about their goals, looks at their lifestyle questionnaire, and she's kind of the low-key refractive coordinator, so that their goal is that it can help me focus down a little bit on a couple of options. Because when I walk in, I need to know, is the patient willing to pay for a premium product like the trifocal or a bifocal or whatever in the presbyopia correction category, or are they only interested in basic surgery? Because if I know they're only interested in basic surgery, then I can focus on the value proposition for astigmatism correction or the value proposition for the femto, right? But if I go in and they tell me already, well, the patient is interested in astigmatism correction or femto, then I can, at that point, try to present a value proposition for the next step up, just so we understand we're not leaving anything on the table. Patients okay with reading glasses. They're okay with using reading glasses for their cell phone. So these are some of the things that I want to make sure they understand before I walk out of the room. Because if I don't give a firm recommendation for my counselor, if I tell my counselor this patient is a good candidate for a toric or a femto or a bifocal or trifocal or EDOF or whatever, technology, then it's a little bit of paralysis by analysis for the refractive counselor in some instances. So my goal is to be able to funnel them down, and my scribe is going to help funnel me down so I can focus on a couple options. So that being said, when I'm in the room, I agree with you. If the patient expresses interest, sometimes I do go ahead and quote them the price for that trifocal or the toric package, whatever it is, because I think you want to sometimes at least give them a heads up. But most of the time, I do try to avoid it. I try to just say, you've got deductibles, and everybody's insurance is different. They're going to go over that. But if I can tell there's a huge amount of reluctance or a huge amount of inquisitiveness about that price, then I will go ahead and inform them. But I'd rather be able to send them to the counselor with the value proposition for the technology, so they really understand the why of why they're interested in this technology. And then when they get to the counselor, they can decide if that monthly payment or if the care credit, or if the deductible's too high, and then maybe we back down to a lower level. And the last thing I'll say, Blake, is I love how you want to simplify things. And just to share my simple spiel, if a patient's really confused, I can just say, well, Mr. Jones, you kind of got to understand it's just really three options: basic surgery and stay in bifocals, or we're going to correct your astigmatism, give you the best distance vision. We can do that with a laser or lens or both, depending on your anatomy. Or we put in a lens that's going to try to reduce your need for glasses as much as possible. So basically, in about 15 seconds, I gave them three options, and I'm going to pick the technologies that we're going to employ. So that's kind of how, to culminate a lot of thoughts into a little segment about that. So that's
I love
my
it.
thought.
And some people are kind of like, well, gosh, why are you thinking about the next package up or whatever? And that demonstrates a lack of understanding that this is their only chance to do something, right? So you're wanting to make sure they understand that, like, this is your one shot. It's no different than putting in a heart valve, right? People come to me all the time that upset because a doctor put in a basic implant. They didn't even know these other implants existed, right? So I love that you actually are kind of banking on that and understanding that you got to overeducate, you got to over communicate, or else they may not even know, they don't know what they don't know, right?
Yep.
So I think that's
Yep.
huge. Most of all, guys, you got to know who not to operate on, right? So this is an amazing email I got a few years back, and I had a lovely, it was an engineer, shout out to Carlos. And I actually like operating on engineers. They just ask the same questions I would, right? As long as they're nice. If they're jerks, I don't operate on them. But I had a great consult, and I thought everything was fine. The guy started calling my practice multiple times, like the next day, right? And like, yeah, well, Dr. Blake will call you at the end of the day. We had a busy day, and then finally sends this email. And you can read it there. He's like, yeah, I want you to ask Dr. Blake, do I have any posterior corneal stigmatism? Which toric IOL is he doing? Did he use at least 2 instruments to make my preoperative astigmatic measurements? Is he doing IOL Master or LensStar? Is he using intraoperative amerometry by WaveTech? I mean, guys, like, oh my God, this is crazy, right? So I always ask, I love bringing this up at meetings, because I always ask who would operate on this person, and almost no one raises their hand. So I actually called and answered this guy's questions, right? And he was completely satisfied with that. We ended up doing a toric lens, and he was one of my happiest patients, right? So that's the thing, is this would kind of run most people off. And I think that's probably not a bad idea, but maybe I just got lucky with this one. But I find that asking a lot of questions isn't necessarily the worst thing, especially in an engineer. The biggest thing that I find is people who are jerks, right? So if you mess with my staff, if you're negative to one of my girls, or talk down to them, or anything that just kind of lets on that you're a malignant personality, I don't care how well you behave when I'm in the room. I'm not touching you. I'm certainly not doing a presbyopia lens, right? But if you just have a lot of questions that need some hand holding, I don't mind doing that, right? So what about you, Carlos? Have you encountered some of these types of patients down there in South Florida, and kind of what types of people give you pause, where maybe you're gonna, we call it an option 4, meaning no surgery.
That's funny. That's funny. I've one of my younger associates says that I've made his career by being malignant to patients at times, and he ends up seeing them as second opinions. So, I think I've gotten a little, actually, I've probably gotten a lot more cranky over the years. And I think my patience and my wife regularly remind patience isn't what it used to be. I have red flags, and one of the red flags is when people show up with lists of questions, and so I tend to sort of shut people down pretty quickly. And so if you show up with 30 questions, I say, pick 3 questions out of that list, and I'll answer the 3 questions. And they'll say, no, I have 30 questions. I got to answer. I said, pick 3 questions, and I'll answer 3 questions for you. Now, I'll answer the 3, and then there's a 4th one comes up, and then they'll say, can I ask another question? I said, no, sorry, that was another question. You wasted one of your questions. So I kind of make a little bit of a joke about it. But the flip side is, if you can't limit your questions to 3 or 4 questions, I will say, you know what? You are you're obsessive about things. You really are really important. And that's okay. You're allowed to be obsessive, but your obsession is not allowed to drive me crazy. So if you are going to do this, we can't have this relationship. So we got to figure out. So I'm glad to operate on you, and you got to kind of keep your things in check. And if you can't, that's okay. And sometimes we don't make a match. We don't make a love connection. And sometimes we do. But it's just really, really tricky at times. And again, one of the issues is listen to your staff. Remember, we only have a limited amount of time with the patients. And Blake, you mentioned it real well. The staff will tell you ahead of time, and Quentin mentioned as well. The staff mentions ahead of time, hey, this patient, has specific questions about this or that or the other. And, early on in our careers, we want to do surgery, and we don't sometimes listen to our staff. So being sensitive to our staff. So I've had patients who I'm ready to operate on, and the next day my scheduler say, this lady's called me 20 times, and I'll bring the patient back and I'll talk to them briefly, and I'll say, listen, I can't do your surgery because, we're not having a connection here. I can't communicate to you. And, so I don't discharge them necessarily, but I guess option 4 is what you politely referred to it as. I wish I had, a magic wand. Some of it's radar. And so a lot of that is just, again, speaking to patients and and making sure, again, we tend to, as our careers progress, spend less time with the patients and more time with ancillary staff. And if you have ancillary staff that have good radar, and I think I do, and a lot of us do, but ultimately, you've got to live with the patient. One of my associates says, a patient has a problem until you operate on them, and then it becomes your problem. So all the pre-existing issues, and Blake, you mentioned this early on in the workup, I love it, is you got to tell the patient, dry eyes, cataract surgery doesn't fix dry eyes. Cataract surgery doesn't fix floaters. And cataract surgery doesn't fix your psychological pathology. But I don't usually say that to patients. But you got to be aware of that.
I love it. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I just add one quick thing on an objective criteria? If you see people with small cataracts and big visual complaints, and especially with minimal refractive error, that's another population where I'm very careful, and I go through that exhaustive list to find what the real problem is, because normally it's not the cataract, but especially early in my career, you just get so excited to have anybody coming in for surgery. Then the later you get, and especially now with these premium technologies and high expectations, small cataract, big visual complaints, especially glare out of proportion to the cataract, you just got to be very cautious with those people.
Yeah, it's got to make sense, right? It's got to make sense, and I think that's a great pearl. One of the things I learned from my dad, he always says one of the strongest phrases in the refractive cataract surgeons' vocabulary is, "I've decided not to take on your case," which sounds crazy, right? Because it's like the patient. I've said that a few times. I said, I've looked into it and I've looked at the scans. I've decided not to take on your case, and here's why. There's some other specialists in town you could consider, and they're blown away because they think, of course, this guy's going to operate on me, right? But you don't have to take on every case that you get, and it's a very powerful tool. They end up kind of begging you to take on their case, and oftentimes I don't. So that's good stuff. Intra-op, we've moved on to intra-op, and this is quick and simple because it's by far the easiest part, right? So use great technology and take it to the hoop and do great surgery, right? So you got to do that. That's super important. I love this video. Check this out. Here's Sir Harold Ridley preparing for getting scrubbed up for his surgery. This is the technology they were having to deal with. Look at that craft knife sawing off that cornea way back in the day, and they pop up. This is like one of those South Florida cataracts here. He's pushing that out, and he's popping a little lens in here, right? So that's what they were having to deal with back in the day. And if you're still doing surgery like this, no matter what kind of expectations you're setting, you're probably not going to do well. But these days, man, we got all these tools. We have these light adjustable lenses that can move macromers at the micron level, and all these different trifocals and EDOFs and femtos. So make sure that you're using great lenses and great technology and do great surgery. And then the last part of this talk is the post-op section. Assuming everything has gone well up to this point, you just don't shoot yourself in the foot. And any little thing that your staff does, your technician does, can kind of derail what was objectively a good outcome, right? So some of my pearls: nail the post-op experience and make it a celebration. All right. One of the best things I do the night of surgery, John Burrell taught me this. It's the best tip I've ever been given, especially for you young surgeons out there that are trying to make a name for yourself. Call your patients the evening after surgery. They will never, ever forget it. And I don't care how many cases I'm doing. I will sit down that evening and make all those phone calls. And sometimes it takes an hour. But man, those 30 seconds to 2.5 minutes that I spend means the world to them, because oftentimes they don't even see me the OR day, right? I'm just bouncing back and forth between rooms. So you have so much rope, and you're setting yourself up for success. Over-communicate with all the technicians checking vision and working up your refractive post-op on the following things. Number one, check vision with both eyes open. After both eyes are done, check vision with both eyes open. That's how we walk around in life. We don't walk around life doing what I call the refractive salute, right? Comparing eyes. That doesn't make any sense. So start off by checking with both eyes open. You can establish that actually they're seeing pretty well. And then, of course, you can occlude and do one eye at a time. I always start at 2400, and I push vision and encourage blinking the whole way down. Once they pass what they were uncorrected pre-op, we stop and we acknowledge that. We say, wow, that's what you used to be without glasses. That's incredible. Day one, you're already able to see that, right? When it comes to near vision, we always use a pen light or cell phone light. to help them with their near cards. Okay, that's always important because our exam room is also kind of dim or dark. And we celebrate any and all visual outcomes on day one, right? So I don't care if they're 20/40 minus on day one. We're like, wow, that's incredible because you were 2100 uncorrected before. That's great, you know? Yeah, oftentimes they are 20/20 or better day one, but sometimes they're not, right? And that's okay. You don't want to, you never want, you know, a technician to kick in and say, oh, you can't see that? I had one do that to me one time. It derailed this patient's psychology. It took me weeks to get them back on board. They thought something was wrong. Words matter. We use the word congratulations all the time. I don't care if they're 20/40 on day one. We say, wow, congratulations. That's fantastic. And you're going to get even better, right? So using powerful words like that are great. Patients feel like they won something. Be careful with your tone and your word choice. And then lastly, never show a patient a line of vision they can't see. Make sure you tell your technicians that. And what I mean is, how often do they check a patient's vision and they get to 20/30 or 20/25, right? And they're just barely reading that line. Maybe they're reading like half of that line on day one post-op, right? And then the technician says, okay, cool, and leaves the room. And they're sitting there for 5-10 minutes waiting for me to get in the room, staring at that line that they could just now barely read, right? And they're thinking, oh gosh, I can kind of barely sort of see that, right? So roll the vision up. So if they read 20/20, we put it on 20/30. If they read 20/40, I'm putting it on 20/60. Whatever that line they just read, always bump it up a couple lines. So when they're sitting there in the exam lane waiting to see you, they're seeing something that they can see very, very clearly. That's a good tip. So Quentin, do you have any tips for sort of celebrating successful outcomes with your patients? Anything that you guys do to make it kind of an enjoyable post-op experience?
Yeah, these are great pearls, Blake. I mean, on the first day, I think a lot of these are really good pearls. One thing I try not to do, and some of this was about setting expectations that you're going over, right? So if we see somebody who is seeing 20/20 the day after surgery, and you know, it's not, of course, not everybody is seeing 20/20 or 20/25, but if they are, I don't tell them what numerical line they're seeing. Because what happens is, and the techs occasionally will burn me on this, patient comes in and goes, yeah, you know, Robin said I'm seeing 20/20. And, you know, so then I have to, you know, go talk to that particular tech, say, please don't share that, because what happens, they come in a week and they go, oh, am I seeing 20/20 still today? And then you have to break the news that initial hyperopic shift has faded back. Now they're minus a half and they're 20/30. They're like, well, why am I not? And then every visit they come in and go, well, am I 20/20 today? So, you know, that's one of the things I tell my staff is tell them, wow, you're already legal to drive. So we never tell them numerical values just so the patients can get excited. And I'll say, look, you're already legal to drive without glasses. Or like you say, you're already seeing better than you were before surgery with glasses. Another thing that I like to do with the presbyopia lenses, you said to use the light source. So I start without a good light source to check their near vision. We'll do that in the room with just standard overhead illumination. And then if they struggle with that, then I'll go ahead and turn the light up to show them how important light is. But if they don't struggle, and with the newer lenses, we get people who can read J1, you know, especially at the 1 week visit, I expect them to be reading J1, J2, or even J1 plus, and they're reading that in average room light. So if they do that in average room light, I'm like, holy cow. And I'll show the spouse the reading card. I'll say, do you see what they just read without glasses? Because sometimes these people come in claiming that they can't see well up close, right? So that's the best. When you show them the J1 line, they whip it off after telling your technician that the reading's not that great. And then you show their spouse who's over there with thick glasses and they can't even see that J1 line. And they're like, honey, you read this line? I can't even see it. So, I mean, little things like that, I think, can help your patients realize how well they're seeing. And the last one is, you know, sometimes these people are complaining about how terrible their vision is. And I'll say, give me your old glasses. And I'll look, and they've been walking around with their +3 glasses on in both eyes. And I say, well, look, you're looking through these glasses. So I'll pop it out and I'll show them how good the vision is without. And then I'll do the one-eyed salute to say, well, tell you what, go ahead and cover the eye that I just did surgery on. And they've got a cataract in the other eye, 20/40, 20/50. And I say, does my lab coat look nice and white and bright? And they'll go, yeah. Can you read my name here? Yeah. And they'll say, now cover that eye and read it with the eye that we just did surgery in. And they go, oh, wow. Holy cow, I didn't realize things were that bright. I didn't, you know, and I say, can you read it? And they go, yeah, much better than the other eye. So I think those little demonstrations are really important, and that kind of sets the stage for making them excited about the other eye and also making them validate how successful the surgery was in front of their significant other.
I love it. That's huge. And that's kind of part of what I have for pearls to the unhappy patients. A couple things that you talked about there. This is my last slide because, the unhappy patient is something that we never want to deal with it. But if you have the right tools, you can dismantle these folks pretty quick. It can be psychological warfare, but if you're prepared with these pearls, you'll be fine. You're going to end up on top. So more than anything else, the unhappy refractive cataract patient wants to understand and feel understood. Right? That's important. Don't just ignore them. Listen to what they're saying. So, I understand that. Here's why you're experiencing that. And I want you to understand what I'm going to offer you and what our choices are, right? They want to understand and feel understood. That's huge. One thing that Q was talking about there is show them where they came from so they appreciate where they are, right? So routinely, I'll dial up in the foreopter if they were a +2 hyperope before surgery, and I'll make them look through and look at the Snellen chart. They can't see anything. And then I take it away and they're like, oh man. And I was like, so let's at least acknowledge that you are so much better than you used to be. And I love doing it in front of the spouse. That's huge. Make them tell you what they can do, not what they can't. And that's what Quentin was just telling you. Can you see my lab coat? Can you see my name? Tell me what you can do. I get that nothing's good and you're unhappy and it's red and you can't see far, distance, anything in between. Just tell me a couple things that you can do, because I know there's a few in there, right? Yag early, but be aware of the early yag, right? So yes, these new lenses and presbyopia lenses are incredibly sensitive to PCO. And so I yag early and often, but you don't want to yag too early, because what if you have to do an exchange? So the biggest thing I do is I ask them, hey, listen, were you ever happy with this lens? And if they say, yeah, man, I was rocking like first 2 or 3 weeks or first month or two, I was fine. And then it kind of tailed off. Well, that's a classic. You need to yag them early, right? But from the jump, if they just weren't happy and you can tell that even despite your extensive over communication, that they're just not a happy camper, you got to get that lens out, right? So you don't want to yag them too soon. Go ahead and get that lens out and put in something else. If they have a residual refractive error, do a contact lens trial. Make sure they like it. Make sure they prove it. And if they do, go ahead and do an excimer touch-up, or you can do a lens exchange. Get comfortable with lens exchange. Don't do it too soon. Most people say between 2 and 4 months is kind of that spot. But I have had some patients that are just miserable at 1 month, and I just I don't want them walking around the community talking to people about how unhappy they are. So every once in a blue moon, I'll do it at a month, but never before a month. Usually I try to wait at least 2 or 3 months to let them neuroadapt. Making sure that you know what they're going to take away. If you're going to take that lens out, that presbyopia lens, make sure they know that beautiful J1 vision, that's going away, because I'm putting a monofocal lens in there, right? Sometimes when you phrase it like that, you make them understand. They say, you know what, maybe that halo and glare at night's not so bad, right? Remind them of those pre-op chronic issues. That's huge. Always, it's a good idea to invite family in the room, as several of you have mentioned. Sending to a colleague for a second opinion can help. I love sending my retina specialist, and they say, listen, I have nothing to do with Dr. Williamson's practice. We're a separate entity, but here, you look fantastic. There's nothing wrong here. They show you some images. They come back to you and they're very reassured. And then lastly, always run to these patients. Never, ever, ever abandon them. That's how you end up in lawsuits and bad things like that. And if you stick it out, you're going to end up with happy patients. So Tal, I thought that maybe to bring us home here, maybe you can kind of share some pearls on how you would manage the unhappy patient in your practice.
I think it was so great. I get 2 kinds of unhappy patients, the ones I rendered and the ones that were rendered outside. And it's very different. I feel like in my case, I've set them up as best I can, and I'm always trying to titrate what I say, and I've got it down to sort of like 9 words, like what we say to patients beforehand. Make sure they're okay with the touch-up. Everyone that gets a presbyoptic well, they have to understand there's a bell curve of healing. They may end up on the outskirts. They may heal out of focus. We need to bring them back in. They may need a touch-up. Some people never want a second procedure, then it's not for them. That being said, Blake, these are great tips. I love the contact lens trial beforehand, before doing something. When I see a patient coming in and something they're complaining of distance vision, one not being great, a lot of times they're -75, and they're sitting there reading their phone and reading their notes. And of course, showing them that the reason they don't see that well is that's a monofocal patient. And they say, this eye is terrible. I can't do anything with this horrible. Of course, you're having them read the phone, and then you cover their distance eye. They can't read their phone anymore. And they realize their horrible eye is the eye that's doing everything for them. That's a trick I use a lot. And when they're unhappy with the multifocal, for whatever reason, sometimes we can make it up on the second eye. So that's the one option I try. If they have a lens, sometimes with the trifocal, they just don't get enough near. They got distance, the intermediate, not enough near. I'll now use maybe the other trifocal lens the other I get them near. Or if they have glare and halos in the first eye, you got the near. Let's put a monofocal in the other, and that can probably take care of this. Let's hold off on that lens exchange till the second eye. Now, some people, want everything fixed over here, but most are convincible they have a bad cataract. Do the other eye with more simple lens, the ones we're going to do here, and I would say 60-70% of the time we avoid having to go back to that first eye. So those are some pearls for dealing with these patients, but it's important. We sort of have a little algorithm that we do because all our staff treat these patients the same, and it starts with basically refracting them. Are they 20/20 or not? If they're not, we got to do all those pre-op tests again to see what is it that makes them not 20/20. How do we fix that? And take it from there.
I love it. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone listening, and I appreciate learning from all you guys. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. But our hope is that, if you take some of these pearls home, that all of a sudden the preoperative consult is going to be way less challenging, and you'll end up with much happier patients on the back end. Ashvin and Bill, over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Blake. I think this topic is such a sensitive yet such an important topic in our practice. And these are certain things, which are unsaid and unspoken about in most meetings that we go to. It's such a thrilling encounter that, hear this on an online platform like this. So thank you so much, Blake and Tal, Carlos, Quentin, for, chipping in with all your special pearls. I'll give everybody a little bit of a background of, or a recap of what all I heard and what I've basically, take home to my practice, something like Carlos, you mentioned about adding comedy to the conversation, and choice paralysis, which Blake mentioned, was a very important aspect. Go directly hit the target hard. Understanding the patient's background, what do they do? These are certain pearls which you guys gave out, all of you gave in some way or the other. Answer their questions, don't abandon them. And those are things which you'll never know. Actually, that happens a lot. When you start answering those questions, it really changes the whole paradigm, and you're able to connect with that patient. And obviously tell them what they can do versus what they can't do. These are some of the pearls which I really, I'm going to take home strongly. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here. Thanks the sponsors, and most importantly, thank you, audience, for actually tuning in and listening to this very important conversation. There are going to be a lot of pearls snippets that are going to come out on our social media, so do watch out and connect with us on those platforms. Happy to see you guys next month. Over and out. I know we have just about crossed our 1 hour threshold, but thanks a lot. Anybody wants to say last few words, happy to have that.
Great presentation tonight, and glad to be on with a bunch of superstars.
Thank you, Carlos. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you guys next month. Bye.
Bye.